Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Hopefully, there we go. No issues today. Well, welcome to our League for Innovation in the Community College and PACBAC Generative AI monthly roundup. And today's theme is a deep dive into academic AI policy. Also, if I haven't said it yet, happy Leap Day. We get one every 4 years, so make it count. Am I right? While we are waiting for folks to join, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, input your name, your role, your institution, and optionally, if you're feeling fun and want to share a little bit about yourself, one thing that you hope to learn or gain from today's session on AI policy. So before we get started, some housekeeping. We will, of course, record this webinar, and there's an attendee certificate as well, and that will be shared and accessed within 2 days. You'll get that automatically from the PACBAC team. Please ask all of your questions in the Q&A feature, not the chat. The Q&A will allow us to find questions. The chat is for sharing your perspective, sharing your thoughts, sharing resources, and your ideas. I'll be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A, but again, questions in the Q&A function, please. Now, today I have some wonderful panelists for us. So we'll do some brief introductions before I pass it to Dr. Rufus Glasper for an introduction. So my name is Kelsey Berenger. I'm the CEO of PACBAC. I have been really enjoying learning more about the intersection of AI and education since joining the PACBAC team over 6 years ago. Before that, I was a chemistry and physics teacher, so I like to keep it in the STEM family. But I'll go ahead and pass it to Scott to introduce himself.
Morning, everybody. I'm Scott Rogers. I'm professor of general and liberal studies here at the College of Southern Idaho. My main focus is in wellness. I teach stress management, and then I teach wellness through art. But I also get to the challenge of teaching general education courses. And this semester, I'm teaching playing in the mud and leadership.
I would love to play in the mud. That sounds very fun. Up next, Dr. Samra, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Samra Kulam. I teach in the education department. I teach some of my courses I teach specifically that's relevant to this is an educational technology class. So how to equip our future teachers and how to integrate technology appropriately. And I'm also part of the AI committee on CSI's campus.
Thank you so much. Also, Samra, worth noting that you have my dream job. That's exactly what I wanted to do when I left teaching. So a little bit jealous of you. And then Reed, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Reed Hepler. I'm the Digital Initiatives Librarian for the College of Southern Idaho, and I'm also in a master's program in Instructional Design and Technology at Idaho State University. And in those dual roles, I kind of help educators find open and accessible technologies and educational materials. And I am also on the AI committee for the College of Southern Idaho, along with Samra.
Great. And then last, but certainly not least, I am joined by Dr. Rufus Glasper, President and CEO of the League for Innovation in the Community College. So Rufus, would you mind introducing yourself and then also just giving us a little bit of a note, a state of the union, if you will, on today's discussion around AI policy?
Well, thank you very much, Kelsey, for this opportunity, and panel. Thank you for joining us today. This has been an exciting journey around this topic of generative AI. And I have continually, through our partnership with PACBAC and our webinars and our discussion sessions, I've continually brought up the notion of what's happening with policy and policy relative to individual institutions, departments. There's a lot of discussion in the department level. And I'm very excited about what we can hear today from the College of Southern Idaho. And I was excited also to hear Scott's response, because when he talks about this notion of playing in the mud in leadership, that kind of resembles some of the things I've been doing over my many years in higher ed and with the Maricopa Communities College System. I also mentioned a conversation I had with the president and CEO of EduCollege yesterday, and he shared with me this Gartner Hype Cycle 2023, And I asked you to just Google it and look it up. There's one for 24 as well. But in 23, it talks about the hype cycle for artificial intelligence, and it shows generative AI at the peak of inflated expectations. And when you go through what has happened over the cycle that we have been engaged with this conversation with our colleges, with our students, I think our cycles have peaked, and I still believe that they're continuing to peak, but I also think that they're starting to level off. So this conversation today will help us kind of think about what institutions are doing in many ways. So please be engaged in the chat, in the Q&A. Share some of your thoughts in the chat, but give your questions in the Q&A so we can get a better sense as to what others are doing. But with that, I will ask you to engage with us and hold on to your seats. And let's go play in the mud a little bit. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks so much. Well, scope of today, we're really going to be focusing on policy creation development, and then also some additional applications of generative AI if we have time, because this crew today and the panel today has been definitely playing in the mud when it comes to generative AI and teaching. But to get us started, we'll do just a quick poll to understand, who's in the room with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll. You should be able to see it. Want to assess comfort level with generative AI, and then also just how often you're using generative AI. So panelists, if you wouldn't mind just maybe quickly sharing, how often are you using generative AI in your everyday lives, whether it's professional or personal?
I use it every single day, and I use a lot of different types every day: text, image, audio, music. Recently, I just kind of explore and see how I can integrate it into what I've been doing in the past.
I'm with Reed. I probably use it every single day in some kind of capacity, whether it's, refining some assignments or just, creating images like he said. But the things are constantly changing, so you definitely have to keep up with it.
I use it almost every day. Not every day, but close to, and I'm using it more for the tech side and the creation of content. But I'm looking into and trying to figure out more of the artistic side. So using the multimedia aspect and teaching students how to engage in that side of things also.
Yeah, love it. Well, I would say that we have a good amount of representation in the room today. We have some folks who are super familiar with AI, some folks who are maybe they're a little bit novice in their journey, but we certainly have a decent amount of AI usage today. So let's hop into, I'm actually going to skip to one big story on what's new in AI. And keep in mind, there's new stuff in AI every second of every day. But the big story I want to share is OpenAI launched Sora AI, which if you want to track this on social media or read blog posts about it, it's pretty, I'd say the tone is existential crisis. And you'll know why in a moment. But I have Sora AI open here. And this is an AI generated video, no audio yet. Sora AI doesn't have audio. And the prompt was this simple prompt here: a movie trailer featuring the adventures of a 30-year-old spaceman wearing a red wool knitted motorcycle helmet, blue sky, salt desert, cinematic style, shot on 35mm film. So this is pretty good. So the existential crises that I've been privy to, thanks to the internet, have included things like, what happens to our animators and our directors and our actors if this could all just be AI generated? And what happens to how we discern reality from AI generated? How easily can we start ruining our own lives, ruining people's lives, right? So, Sora AI is interesting in that it's kind of the first, I think, AI program I've seen where I'm getting a bit nervous and excited, but nervous. So I want to discuss what is probably an elephant in the room for educators, which is this concept of discerning reality from fake, right? And so as generative AI advances, I'm curious to hear from our panelists. Feel free to hop off mute and share your perspectives. But what's our responsibility as educators as AI gets better and better and better, and it's harder to, distinguish from reality?
One of the things I struggle with my students is having them even want to care if it's real or not. And so understanding the value of information and where it comes from, they have so many tools at their access that a lot of times I don't think they care where the information comes from, as long as they can get to it quickly and find a response. And so building that value system with young students and helping them to understand that value moving forward in their educational pursuits.
And I'm the same with when Kelsey first started talking about it, is that the common ground of what's true. And, you know, sometimes that like seeing with your eyes is believing. And now it's like, well, that line's totally out. Just because, you know, just because you see it doesn't mean it's actually even true. But I think through fear, we can hopefully use it as a motivator for opportunity. Is the thing that I always think about is, and so what will this require of our, you know, students is to be critical thinkers, you know, and those kinds of things that we know that people in the workforce are constantly asking, like, well, how are we making these critical thinkers? And I think through AI, it's going to really force us to have them see the value of it. And the skills that they're going to need is maybe even learning how to ask good questions. You know, when you see a video, when you see information, that you know how to ask questions to get to that truth and that reality of what you're seeing. So it's just going to be hopefully an opportunity, to be honest.
And Reed, I'll put the spotlight on you too to chat a little bit about, you know, the mechanisms, the recommendations you give students to actually discern reality from not reality.
So one of the things that I use is the SIFT method, which is on the next slide here, and it is a 4-step framework developed by Mike Caulfield. We also have, you know, the CRAP method and other things, but the SIFT method is less about the appearance of the content and what it looks like, and less about and more about, excuse me, what it is. So the first step is you stop and you kind of take a step back and say, okay, what am I actually looking at? What's the title of this page? Where does it come from? Who's the publisher? What does it say versus what does it look like? And the second is investigate the source. Where is it coming from? And, you know, what is that group or that person affiliated with? And you go back and back and back. And then the third one, which is a little bit what Samara was talking about with the critical thinking, is find better coverage. Look at other people who were talking about this issue and what are they saying. In research and in library circles, and probably really all educational circles, this is called lateral research, lateral reading. Find different coverage, find other sources, etc. And then finally, trace the claims and the quotes in the media back to the original context. And in order to kind of use this method in my research and in my recommendations to faculty and the students, I've come up with like 14 different things that people need to do to be AI literate, kind of a huge, massive AI literacy framework, because really what you need to do is gain experience with this and try it out for yourself and be an ethical and a thorough consumer of AI products, and kind of use that SIFT method in a lot of different contexts with, you know, obviously with videos and audio. And so that's the SIFT method, and you can use it with text, but you can also use it with a bunch of other media as well.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about how quickly this user generated content scope got in the grand scheme of things. You know, like we launched the first social media platform, I don't know, what would have been MySpace in 2008. And, you know, now we have Twitter, X, we have Threads, we have Facebook, we have Reddit, we have how many different user-generated content apps do we have now? We're to the point where it's almost like hard to catch up, and it's been hard to help our students catch up. So when I think about giving our students the skills they need and hopefully instill critical thinking values in their noggins, but it's a lot about, do they have the resources and the scaffolding to actually do the thing, SIFT method. But back to Scott's point, it's, do they understand why? Do they understand why it's important to do this? And I think whenever we're talking about a new skill for a student or an important skill for a student, explaining the why is always step number one. And the deck will be shared, which has a source in it, but perhaps one of my colleagues can share the link to this SIFT document. I'm looking at him across the room in the chat. So let's talk about academic AI policies, the main course of today's meal, if you will. Now, academic AI policies are exactly what they sound like. They're guidelines for administrators, faculty, students to understand how should AI be used, how should it not be used, how should it be disclosed or cited, what are the risks of generative AI use, and perhaps some sort of note or comment on academic integrity, right? So by the way, if you don't have a policy and you'd like one, we have a great resource for you that will be linked there. But to dive a little bit deeper to the topic of today, how are institutions actually creating AI policies? I'm sure most folks here have been impacted by an AI policy in one way or another, but what I've been able to experience as somebody who's just, again, fascinated by living at the intersection of AI and education is that a lot of institutions are giving faculty autonomy to choose their own adventure. That's how I call it. So giving them resources, maybe it's a robust AI policy bank and saying, hey, choose what's right for you on the spectrum of anti-AI to friendly AI. I've seen institution-specific AI policies created, and today we'll talk about an instance of that with College of Southern Idaho. I've also seen department-specific AI policies generated, given that some departments are probably, I'd say, more interested in teaching their students how to use AI, maybe in something like computer science, where we want probably our engineers using Copilot, right? And we want them using Gen AI tools. And then we're also seeing things as cool and interesting as student-generated AI policies that are adopted by courses or departments. So the scope is quite wide. We are not in a place yet where this is by any means standardized. I think you could argue that we have a somewhat scope guidance on recommendations and what seems most logical. But even then, I think there's a lot of competing priorities and competing perspectives. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to our panelists to talk about the College of Southern Idaho's AI policy. So maybe I'll start with Sam or Reed. If you could share a little information on basically how this policy was created, the journey to get there. I'd love to hear from y'all.
Sure, I'll start and then Reed, you just hop in when I'm going off track. From what I understand is our policy was first initiated at the directive of administration. I think when it first happened, there was so much buzz about it, and our president was really wanting us to be, not falling behind the conversation. And so once that directive was made, we basically created an ad hoc committee. And we were charged with two different things. The first one was going to be making a policy, and then the second one was to provide some training for the faculty on campus. And at our school, we have staff that's working on a different kind of policy for employees, but this is more directive that Reed and I were a part of. Well, he's part of the other one too, but this specific group was focused more about classroom settings and AI. And so our chair who became, and it was just, how it came to be was, it was about 10 people. I think Reed and I said is about 10. It was comprised of faculty, primarily faculty members. We had a couple department chairs in there. And then Reed obviously was there from the library side because he's just such a wealth of information. And so when we needed to see what other people are doing, what other people, the different statements, he's like a plethora, and he just saved us so much time because he was like, okay, here's this. So he really gave us the opportunity to consider what other people are doing before we made decisions. And then what we ended up doing is, I'm so glad, Kelsey, you said the word autonomy, because that was one of my notes for this, is we felt the same way. We kind of felt like, how do we make a policy that really fits a wide variety of faculty? We're a community college, and so we have academic, and then we have our career and technical faculty. And the things that our English department was really considering and really worried about is not the same thing that our welding department is really, worried about. And so we had to kind of keep in mind, how do we keep this a big umbrella? And then people can decide if they want to enhance it and how much more they want to add to it. And so for us, this is the starting point. And then if you really wanted to personalize it, customize it, whether your department creates its own policy or you have one for your own class, it was really going to be up to you to decide. And then the other thing, and then I'll let Reed kind of take over too, was the tone. We were really considerate about the tone of it, and we didn't want it to sound punitive. We did not. We wanted our students, and a lot of our faculty felt like this was a tool. It's a tool that's new, exciting, a little scary, but we didn't want the tone to feel like, if you use this, you're in trouble and you're going to have to face all these kinds of consequences. We really felt like there's a responsibility to teach our students how to use it ethically. You know, there's a responsibility to teach it as a tool to enhance what we're already doing. And so I think those were our two primary concepts that we were really going off of as we created the language. And then, you know, went through the systems of us creating it. We went to our departments, you know, people gave us feedback. We provided it the final, you know, draft to faculty senate, and then they approved it. And then now this is what appears in all of our syllabus. But again, people have autonomy. And one of the things that I just want to make a point, and we even talked about it because people were like, oh, cheating is such a big word that's associated with AI. We already have a policy for cheating. And so we thought, why would we be so redundant to go and, you know, create that tone in this language when if there is cheating, we have an academic integrity policy, we're going to follow it then. And so I think those are the two things that I wanted to kind of highlight that we worked on as a committee, because we just thought, you know, we wanted to approach it in a way that was empowering for faculty and for students.
Samra basically covered all of the main points that I was going to, but I just want to make two notes. First of all, the committee that we used and that we had was possibly like the best committee I've ever been on. Our initial framework, our initial creation of the first draft of the policy took like 35 minutes, and there were 10 of us. I've never seen 10 people agree on something so fast as we all did there. It was really good because it was well-rounded, but we all had the same goals and the same kind of expectations. And the second one, I just want to stress what Samar said about the language. In one of the first drafts, what we had like 4 or 5 paragraphs, and we whittled it down to about 5 sentences, and it was really thorough. But you can see there, we have that learners are responsible for checking the quality and accuracy of their content. One of my first drafts, and to be honest, it was me, said, you know, learners must do this. They have to have accurate citations. They have to show their process. And this way was a much more, this final draft was, you know, you're responsible for it. We're not going to make these requirements, but you're responsible to do this ethically. You're responsible to think through this and have critical thinking skills, like Samar was saying. And so it was less of these restrictions and more of, this is your ethical responsibility, and we're encouraging you to follow this. And that was also on the part of the educators. If you notice, you know, learners may, you know, they may forbid it in their course. They may regulate it, or they may say, you know, students, do whatever you want to as long as you show your work. And it really stressed not only our autonomy as faculty, but their autonomy as students. And I've seen a lot of policies from a lot of different institutions, but I really think this was not only thorough, but it also was welcoming of student agency and, you know, the freedom to do what they wanted to do as long as they were responsible about it. So it was very, I got to, you know, put the quality control and citation stuff in there, but it was much better language than I initially thought. So it was really nice to be a part of that process.
Yeah, I have a couple of more questions. A couple more questions. English is a stretch for me today, about the committee itself, because you said it was a fantastic committee. So I have a couple of follow-up questions. But before that, I want to ask Scott, as a educator who is now using this policy, you know, when you receive this policy, how have you taken it and then made it your own? And what are your expectations for yourself when it comes to AI use? And what are your expectations for students?
The first time we had the policy, there was a kind of a big whiplash from faculty because there were a lot of faculty upset about the number of students being caught violating the academic integrity policy using AI. And so it was a lot of chatter on campus about it needs to be a punitive policy. It needs to be one that keeps them in check. And we did a few little workshops about how you could use AI effectively in a classroom as a teaching tool instead of a gotcha tool. And so that's the approach that I took. Samra and I co-teach a leadership class together, and we use a lot of information that we generate on AI to help the students dial in their learning, but we also taught them how to use the tools. And so instead of using it as a way to check, you know, we used it as a teaching tool. And then the one thing that I had to really think about and work on was, if it's so easy for my students to cheat with AI, I need to do a better job of asking questions and formulating my assignments. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of faculty. And it was kind of a rough meeting to sit through and watch people be upset about, no, I'm not changing my homework assignments. I'm not going to rewrite my tests so they can't be AI proof. Students just need to know that's cheating. And I just sat there and thought, man, you need to move forward. Like, you need to adjust, you need to adapt, and you need to do a better job of teaching so that students don't find it easy to cheat in your class, not as a gotcha tool, but as a better way of getting the information and then assessing the knowledge that they're capturing without having it be easy to do through an AI tool.
Yeah, I can appreciate that point, Scott, of a lot of educators like, oh, dang it. Like, all these assignments are now going to be really easy to game. And a lot of conversations I've had, some insightful perspectives have been, the assignments that in the context in which you deliver them and students are facilitating the assignment, if it is going to be easy for them to copy and paste from ChatGPT and not get caught and then get away with an A, change that, right? That's your first step, is to modify that, even if it takes you a year, right? Like, we might have to be cool with the fact that students are gonna, be sneaky, but not every student's gonna do that, because I, as a student, was not trying to risk my entire academic career and then life on, trying to get out of a quiz. But then you also have the fact of, like, sometimes we just need students to, like, understand definitions of concepts, and sometimes it's going to be the lower level blooms. So rethink the context of those assignments. Instead of it being a take-home quiz or an online quiz on Canvas or Moodle, maybe that's an in-class pen and paper. And if you don't have that, we'll have to be creative, but it's almost like baby steps at a time. Onus is on us to do the critical thinking about what are we trying to actually get out of this course, and then how can I make that reality? There's an interesting question in the chat that I want to make sure we shed some light on, which is managing the nuance between AI of our everyday lives, i.e. when I type an email, autocomplete, versus actual generative AI. And then you also have AI tools like, I'm going to plug PackBack, where you're getting feedback, but it's not writing on behalf of a student. So Reed, Samra, even Scott, when you're thinking about the impact of AI on education, have you considered that nuance? And then how do you plan on addressing it moving forward?
I think it's a tough one, because it's going to take some time to really think about how that's going to look. I think for me, you know what I do, and I'm going to be real honest with everybody. Sometimes what I'll do, because I'm trying to think about, from everyday use to how do I then make it like something that is a benefit to them. One thing that I'll do, and I'll kind of highlight what Scott said, is let's say I'm working on an assignment and I want them to be applicable, right? And we know that learning is going to be a lot more meaningful if it's relatable to their own lives. And so for me, it's always thinking about how do I reshape it and how do I make it that they feel like it's going to be an asset versus just something doing it for them. And so kind of rethinking and restructuring those assignments is usually my first step. And then something you could do if you've never tried this is ask ChatGPT which parts of your assignments they could cheat. So sometimes be like, based off these assignment directions, where could they use you to do it, or whatever, however you're framing it. My English is not being great right now as well, but like, or if I were to revamp this assignment where they can't use ChatGPT, what should I do? And usually when you ask ChatGPT questions like that, they'll usually say, make it personable by making a reflection and make it a current event. Usually those are two primary things it responds back to you. And so for me, I'm always looking at the lens of like, how do I make all these experiences very personable? Because I have, at a community college, we have all walks of life. We don't have traditional students. We have, people coming back, people, that might be, moms, dads, whatever the situation is. And so for me, I'm always thinking about how do I make it a very applicable and something that doesn't feel like that they get a chance to work smarter, with all their responsibilities. So I'm not sure how much I answered that question, but that's kind of where my brain went to.
I'll piggyback that to Samra. A lot of my assignments I changed from understanding and defining to show. Where have you applied this information? Give me a life example. Quote an author, but then show me how you use that in your daily practice. With leadership, it's easy to, pull one-liners off the internet left and right, but where did you apply that? So I focus more on the application piece. And then they can use ChatGPT to find the information, but if they can't connect it and make it relevant to their lives, I don't see the connection. They can gain information and that's great, but then I don't know how they've used that information. And then where I teach in general and liberal studies, we're teaching them how to learn. There's not always application opportunities. So I have to adjust and be like, okay, I do need you just to define these things. And if you can find that information, great. But what do you do with that information is where I'm developing out my course to be more thorough and not just gaining an understanding, but show me you can apply it.
And I put something in the chat too. I think there was a sentiment about online courses being a really tough one to try to ChatGPT proof your assignments. And I think, Scott, you nailed it on the head. It's like, how do we maybe rethink our assignments? I always go to this concept of authentic assessment. So a lot of application of material and research, a lot of maybe documenting process or real life application. So I'm chatting about me and my perspective. So it's also like more fun to write. But also in your scope of, if I have to make my assignments more robust and more nuanced, maybe I also have less of them to keep up with that change so that my work isn't being drastically increased. Reed, any other thoughts on the situation before I ask a little bit more about committee and process?
One of my thoughts on this, and I have a very narrow mind. I am a librarian. I'm a peer educator. I have created courses. I haven't taught college courses yet. But one of my things is for, especially for any college courses, assignments should be based on experiences, experiential, make them project-based. A lot of the best practices in structural design, the principles focus on creating good products, whether or not they're AI generated or whether or not they're human generated. And really, even if people are using AI, as long as they're high quality project and they are being accountable about that, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I personally, and this is again just my personal opinion, I don't kind of like the dichotomy between AI proofing assignments. Really, we should be making assignments that are high level enough that even if they use AI, it's not going to disrupt that process. Demonstrating the application, kind of like Scott and Sam were saying, it really should be more about demonstrating knowledge rather than having rote quizzes. It's about making projects and really internalizing those concepts. But that's the conversation for another day. But essentially, if you make them project-based, something that they have to make content with, then it will be harder to have ChatGPT create text and make it do the whole thing for you. So have them be accountable for that process and have a multi-level process that ends in a product or an experience.
And something we'll get to in a couple of minutes is, if you actually just require or recommend that students use ChatGPT and tell them how they should be using it, then you're kind of you're getting to the end in mind, and you've kind of like removed this entire potential conundrum from your issues list. So before we move on and chat a little bit about how students could be using generative AI actually, and how we could set those expectations, because that's how we're going to end today's discussion, I want to go back to this policy formation conversation. So College of Southern Idaho had a committee. And Reed, you'd mentioned this is like the most pleasant committee you've ever worked on, and you all got to the goal really quickly. I have a question for y'all, and that's first and foremost, did you feel like there was good representation of the entire cast of characters regarding generative AI in education and AI in education? Do you feel like you had advocates in the room for using generative AI? And do you feel like you had advocates in the room for creating a generative AI free classroom? And do you feel like you had the scope of full, let's just say characters, players, roles? And then separately, how would you recommend others go about if they want to recreate this committee process? How should you consider creating your committee so that you do have the full cast of characters?
I do think that, yes, there was a wide range of different backgrounds and things. I And it was kind of interesting because some people came into the committee, and this is true of this committee and of other national groups that I'm a part of. Some of them came into the committee wanting to have, an AI-free environment, and then they became advocates of AI at the end. And others were like, yay AI, I love AI. And at the end, they were much more cautious. So it was very interesting to see that transformation. But I think everyone kind of came into the middle on AI and kind of saw that there were benefits and differences. But yes, definitely a well-rounded group. And one of the things that Tony, who was actually the head of the committee, the chair, if you will, of the committee, he kind of recruited from all different backgrounds. And so he kind of said, who is interested in being on an AI committee? He didn't say, who's pro AI or who's anti-AI or et cetera. He just said, who would be interested in discussing this issue? And that would be one of the best things is don't discriminate based on interest or on goals, but just say who is interested in discussing the issue. And even if you have two people or multiple people who have different goals or different views on things, they can work together greatly.
And I would add that some of them had never even used AI and they were on the committee. And so that's the thing is like whether you're pro or against or or skeptical about it. And some of us use it every day and others were like, I barely touched this thing. And so I think that also helped kind of make the conversation robust. And then we did give opportunities once we did have a draft language. It went back to all the departments on campus to give us feedback about and reactions. We don't like this, we don't like that. And so it wasn't a one and done, it became a conversation. And I think we also knew that like, it was never going to be something that everybody was going to be happy with, to be honest. And we just thought this is a great starting point. And then if you want to be restrictive, then create your language for your class to be restrictive, right? So I think that was just our starting point. But yeah, the more that you can get people with attitude and experience different levels, the more it makes it realize, hey, not everybody's using it. And so it makes you slow down if you are using it all the time.
It's funny based off the comments of like both Reed and Scott, it seems like actually having to go through the process of working through this project was like AI therapy for some people. Like it helped them go from one end of the spectrum to kind of like a middle ground and understand all sides. And Scott, it sounds like as soon as instructors had to start working through it, understanding it, they also then started seeing a little bit more of reality and meeting all in the middle. So it's kind of like there's no way, the only way through it is through it when it comes to AI. Before I start, I'm going to launch a poll about AI policy. Rufus, any questions you have for the panelists about AI policy in their creation of it, their use of it, administrative support? What are you thinking?
I have a number of different thoughts that are going through my mind right now. I really appreciate the panel. But the initial question that I had was, where did the original charge to develop the policy come from? And was it an open-ended opportunity? Were there any guideposts or where did it come from?
It was a directive from our president. Our administration is the one who said, listen, we need to have some kind of language. We need to be talking about this. And what they ended up doing is they formed two different groups. One was, like I said, for the classroom, and then the other one was for staff use, because they're really concerned about FERPA. If people are using it and entering data there, like, are you being really cautious of it? And so basically two groups were formed as a result of this. And Reed is part of both of them, I believe.
Do the other two groups ever meet?
No.
No, they don't. And I'm actually not on that staff committee. I was, I asked if they wanted me to be on it, but they said no. But it is comprised of administration, IT, and marketing is who makes up that committee.
Are your policies, even if they don't meet, are your policies shared among the two groups? Are you aware of and do you opine on or provide input to either side, one way or the other?
So our policy that we made was provided to that other group. They have not come up with any firm policies as of yet, but I was told that they might give a copy of to us to kind of review since we were involved in making the student policy. But I don't think they've actually come up with even a draft right now yet.
The last statement that I will make is that I really like the conversation as it relates to student engagement and output based upon something that's relevant to their lives. I think that's a good nexus point. And I'm just thinking about how a policy around a topic such as this can be implemented across an entire system so that there are institutional principles that drive the policies on both sides. So that, I mean, what I was listening for was some type of institutional principles that help both sides kind of see the impact, because I can also see it impacting department heads on the staff side of the house in terms of development of other institutional policies and practices and the jobs that they do in terms of engagement with students. So no, this is a very good conversation, and I'm taking multiple notes, but those are just some of my initial thoughts, Kelsey. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's also interesting too, because, you know, the reality is that at a lot of institutions, faculty and educator autonomy is a value and it's a philosophy. And the more autonomy you give, that also means the less uniform, you know, and shared, let's say, language or best practice there might be. So there's this weird give and take and this tug and push between the more uniformity we have, and let's say we have a shared set of pedagogical principles that we all follow, that does come at the cost of, let's say, autonomy or academic freedom. So I think in these committees and in the next phase of education, wherein we're probably focusing a lot more time on authentic assessment, generative AI policies, incorporating AI into the classroom, how do we strike that balance between we have shared language and shared philosophies that we've all agreed are best for student, but also we're still giving educators the right to teach the way that feels authentic to them. And I think that's going to be important. And it sounds like your committee had a lot of that essence, if you will.
Does the committee have a shelf life?
Yes, we do. We actually just had this conversation on Monday. And I think part of it was two things: to create a policy and do some trainings. And so, you know, we got the policy intact, and Reed is working on resources for using Canvas that people can access and have their students integrated in their classroom. So Reed's working on that. And then we've been working on providing some professional development during in-service for the faculty as well. And then we believe that then this should then transition to our teaching and learning center, you know, after we've kind of, you know, done our part and kind of got the ball rolling, and then kind of we'll see where it goes from there.
From a presidential CEO position, I would love to see some funding allocated to a committee such as this, so that the committee can stay current, stay engaged, and as the technology morphs in one direction or the other, that your timely review and timely proposed changes or not are supported, and it won't be because you're lacking professional development or engagement, and it can't just be because you have a self-interest. It has to be an institutional interest and financial support.
And I promise Rufus is not a paid actor, but I have a poll to share that is literally exactly what Rufus just said. So I'm going to go ahead and share that poll. Feel free to answer the 3 questions there. It's about policy. And one of the questions is, you know, what do you want to see in your policy? But, you know, Rufus, I'm with you in that, you know, it's time for us to either at a state level, federal level, or even an institutional level, start reconsidering how we're spending money, and knowing that something like committees for professional development, committees for policy are very worthy of spend right now, high ROI. One question I wanted to ask before we move on to some other applications of generative AI that I want to share some case studies. So some institutions have not given faculty a policy yet. And there are a lot of faculty who are still kind of sitting on their hands wondering, what can I do? What can I not do? So any advice from the panelists that you would give a faculty member that has a strong opinion on the subject and is not receiving anything material or philosophical from administration?
I would say if you have faculty senate, I mean, that's usually the body that's supposed to be, advocating for the wants and the needs. And I think that's a great starting point to say, I don't think anyone's really, because for us, it was little pockets of people talking about it and admin was kind of talking about it. And then finally, I just think faculty senate, if you have it, is a great avenue to say, we need to create something, who wants to be a part of this, and then extend that invitation. That's where I think would be a great starting point.
Sorry, I accidentally clicked. Reed, Scott, any other thoughts before we move on and chat a little bit about generative AI? Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and two, I think I've always been kind of a beg for forgiveness type of person in my life. And in my in my classroom when I was 22 teaching 180 18-year-olds as one does, I just kind of realized I didn't have the tools I wanted in technology. So I just started doing, and then I went to administration and said, I did this really cool thing. I built a website and it's been really helpful for the attendance issues we have. And then we started making that best practice. So sometimes you just got to be the change you want to see in the world, right? But small bits at a time. Beg for forgiveness. I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll now before we move on. Seems like a lot of folks don't use a policy yet. I'd be interested to hear in the chat, if you're not using a policy, is that because your institution doesn't have one? Does your institution have one, but you just don't really care to extend it? Curious to hear why you are not using a policy now and if you have plans to use one in the future. But want to just move on to a couple of different spotlights before we wrap up on Gen AI materials and lessons. So we have a couple of faculty members in this Zoom room right now who have been using generative AI with their students and expecting their students to use generative AI. So first and foremost, Samara, I want you to talk about this image here. You showed it to me. I fell in love with it. I want everyone else to use it, and I'm sure my lovely colleague Peter will share this out afterwards or during. But Samara, what is this and how are you using it?
So, kind of going back to our chair, Tony, he also works with he's part of a state. Idaho has a whole group that all the universities have a representative. And so sometimes they're sharing information amongst the different universities, which is really great. And this was shared to us through Idaho State University. They're the ones who shared it. And I just, the same thing, I saw it and I fell in love with it because I think sometimes when we talk about AI, they don't know where the line is for cheating. And I don't know if anyone's ever told them where is the line. And maybe where I think the line is might be different from where another professor think the line is. And so I think one of the things is being very direct with our students and say, this is where I think is appropriate and this is where I think it's not. And so what I'll do now is in assignments that I feel like they're tempted to cheat because maybe it's a little tough, it's going to be time consuming, they might want to go in. I'll put this as a friendly prompt to just remind them like, hey, if you just take my assignments, plop it, directions and plop it into Chat GPT, that's cheating, and we're not okay with that. But if you're going to go in and maybe you have a paragraph, you're trying to wordsmith it, I'm okay with that because sometimes I'll see my English language learners, they really get hung up on maybe the sentence isn't exactly how they want it to be, and they're trying to express their thoughts, and it's really hard. And so for me, it's really being upfront. And like Reed said, if you are using it, then just cite it for me. It's fine. Just cite that you used it, and I'm going to keep going because I know that you got some assistance. And what I'm going to do is, so I've been just putting it in my assignments, but what my plan is for next semester is I usually do like a syllabus quiz just to verify attendance because we have to. But I think I'm going to ask them at the first week of school, what do you think is cheating? And then I want to figure out what they think and what I think is where we're at, and then how we can meet in the middle. I think I'm going to use it as a conversation to say, let's make sure that we're all on the same page, at least in this class, where the lines are. And I think that's sometimes the hard part is we never said where the lines are for students. And I think it's just something that it's our responsibility to be proactive and not the students. I think it's on us to say, these are the boundaries. These are the little things that I want you to stay in. And I think this tool and this visual is easy And it's not like, again, punitive. I just want them to know like, hey, if you do, just cite it.
Yeah, and I think this comment I've said multiple times at this point is we can't ask students to play a game if we have not told them the rules. So it's like we have to tell them the rules. We just have to. So I love this image. And also that every course will have different rules, and that's okay as long as you're sharing those. And even to your point, sharing them continually throughout the entire semester on every assignment. Scott, I know you use generative AI in your course. Specifically, you have students use it. Can you share a little bit more about how you've been using it in your classroom?
Yeah, and I can address this slide too. Sam had shared this with me before, and in my class that I taught, I purposely give them assignment that I know that they might cheat on, but then I embed a Trojan horse, put in some text that's all white or really small font, and they copy and paste it into a discussion board. And, I use gumballs and elephants in the answer or the response, and you'll get back these weird replies. And I just use that as an opportunity in the very first couple of weeks of class, be like, here's what was submitted, retract the names, but then let the students discuss, is this okay? Is this what you want to get out of college? Right. And you get out of it what you put into it. And the same thing with AI, you get out of it what you put into it. And so teaching that lesson and that opportunity in a classroom environment, but then also doing it in an academic way. Here's how you cite it. This is what we accept in this class with our definition of what cheating is, helps them define that. But it also causes some strife across campus because there are some faculty that are like, no AI, period. Like you find it, you use it, you're out of my class. And so helping also students understand how to traverse that world of, you need to know the environment you're in so that you can play within that same set of rules that are defined. I teach a stress management class, and one of the lessons that I've really kind of honed in on the ChatGPT part is having them create study sessions utilizing ChatGPT to test their knowledge and understanding. A lot of times we teach students to answer the questions. We don't teach them how to write the questions. And that's where I've really been developing my curriculum is helping them learn how to ask critical questions, not just find the answer to submit it. And that tool has really helped my students develop a really important skill set that then I have them show me how you're using this in your other class. So in my class, I will give you credit if you can bring in your chemistry notes that you've used ChatGPT to augment, and how have you used that to help understand the content. Not necessarily you're not doing the work, but it's helping you to be a better user of this tool by learning how to ask good questions. And that's really helped me to formulate where and how I ask questions versus I ask them to ask me the questions. And then the response comes in their knowledge of knowing how to get to the content, not necessarily what the answer is. So it's really helped. In another example is I have them create a study guide for a test, and I have them do it around short answer, multiple choice, matching, and essay questions. And they need to write the questions for the test. And then I let the students choose what they think are the best questions, and I make that the unit test or the chapter test. So they're helping to develop the questions on the back end. And in doing so, they need to know the information to ask the really good questions. So it's just been for me a switch of my paradigm and how I teach and what I'm looking for versus what I want them to learn to be able to apply in other classes, not just mine. And it is unique, right? I don't have a ton of content that I'm trying to create that they have to know at the end of the semester. Whereas in, my medical assisting class, the teacher that's like, I can't do that. Like there's a set number of things they have to be able to know to pass medical terminology. I can't have them ask the questions. They need to know the content. So it is course specific, but her and I worked through some of her assignments and looked at where could you do this different and build out a better understanding and not just a comprehension.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. It's teaching skills when you can teach skills. And then when you're teaching something that students just need to memorize it, or else people might lose the wrong bone, right? If we're teaching orthopedic surgeons, how can we create an environment where they truly have to, we are testing their ability to remember the most important things in front of them. We have about 6 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is rapid fire through one more resource. And then I want to ask panelists for their final thoughts, whether it's a recommendation to faculty, an administration on AI policy, or just a recommendation for faculty who are still in, let's say, the beginning of their AI journey. Here is an assignment that Samara sent with me, and I think I have the source here. It should be on the internet, but it's a ChatGPT friendly assignment on becoming the next Bill Nye. So this is a great example of an assignment that actually requires the use of ChatGPT. It makes it really clear where you're going to use it, and it makes it clear where students have to start inputting their own research, opinions, critical thinking skills. So to me, a great way to kind of I know, play a game of chess here is actually just ask them to use AI, because once you do that, I think their brain will just kind of short circuit and be like, oh, okay, yeah. I don't think they're going to try to figure out how to game that system or cheat the assignment. So I'll go ahead and ask our panelists here to share, maybe with 5 minutes left, just 30 seconds each for folks. Either a recommendation for faculty who might still be at the beginning portion of their journey with AI and maybe even just feeling a little bit overwhelmed around where to start or how to tackle this, or recommendation for faculty or administration if they don't have AI policies yet and they want to be a part of the process or start the process. So who wants to start first? I was going to say I would go alphabetical order, but my brain kind of broke because it's not as obvious. But Scott, why don't you start? I saw you lead in.
Yeah. For me, it was be brave. Don't be afraid to dive in. It is a very scary world, and it comes with a lot of unknowns. And so I don't want to look incompetent in front of my students. And so I need to know the tools inside and out before I try to teach them. But then also we have resources. We have a teaching and learning center. And I jumped in there and said, hey, help me figure out how to do this. And their eyes just lit up. They're like, thank you. Like, it's not punitive. It can be an educational tool. So there are people there that will tap into their resources and their strengths to help me develop that skill set.
One thing that I would say, the last thing, is to kind of focus, kind of like Scott said, on jumping in, but also learn about AI literacy. There's a wonderful Canvas course by Rush University on AI literacy that talks about the awareness of what different tools can do, how are they made, what are the ethical issues with their origins, etc., and kind of knowing what AI literacy is so you can advise your students on how to be ethical and not focus, not require them not to use it, but teach them how to use it ethically and effectively. And yeah, jump right in with your students as well as yourself.
And I would just say, if you don't have a policy going, then why not be the person that initiates this? Like, you don't have to know everything about AI. You just have to be curious enough to want to maybe start it. And so if you don't have if the ball's not going, why not you is my question, is why not take the chance to just see who else on campus is interested, and not wait until somebody else does it. You can be the change that we know that is needed, is the thing I would emphasize.
I'm Rufus.
I want to thank the panel for their comments today, and I would charge PACBAC and the league to have a conversation regarding a repository of policies, asking colleges to send those to us, and then think about presenting, pulling together an article in terms of some of the policies, because many of our colleges have not started the journey. They've been reactive, and they're looking for some best practices. And from that, I would also think about, and we'll try to do it from our position, how do we connect the messaging? I like the fact that the charge came from the CEO, but I'd like to think about the messaging we can give to our trustees and our boards, so that they become more informed and are not listening to the rhetoric that they read or see on the television, but they realize that their institutions are acting proactively in the best interests, and balancing the potential output with strong engagement with the students. So rather than penalizing the students, great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, panelists, for your insight. I really appreciate the time. Some of us came directly from class, maybe even cut class short to be here. So greatly appreciate it. And then folks in the chat and in the Q&A and in attendees, thank you so much for all the packbackers who joined and took their lunch. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Thursday. We'll see y'all in a month. Bye, everyone.